Hello, Taylor Elwood here with the Men's Mysteries. This week I thought that I would talk about what it means to be relational. What does it mean to be relational? I've been thinking about this a lot and partially been thinking about it because of a book that I have been reading that my beloved had recommended to me. Actually, she didn't really recommend it to me. She told me about it in passing. And this is before we were actually getting involved with each other relationally. We were involved with each other relationally, but it was before we evolved the relationship toward romance. And I thought it was quite fascinating. The book in question is called Evolutionary Relationships by Patricia Albier. Made me think a bit about some of what Dewey Freeman talks about in regards to relational aspects of relationship, which is, he's associated with the uncivilized nation. One of the things that he says or points out is, kind of the question of, can I be okay? Can you be okay? And can we be okay together? Can we be okay separately? And I think those are important questions to ask. But what's interesting is that with evolutionary relationship, what the author is exploring is how to evolve relationships toward a state of mutuality. And I've been thinking a lot about that. Like, what does it mean to be in mutuality? I mean, one of the central premises is that once you're in the relationship, you're never out. The relationship may change and evolve, but you're never really out. And I think about that, and I think, can we ever really be out of a relationship? I mean, you can break up with somebody, right? And yet, that person's still going to have a presence in your life. I mean, I think about that in regards to exes that I've been involved with. There's been times where they have lived rent-free in my head and my heart. And, I mean, if I could process with them, that might resolve some of it. But usually that desire to process has more to do with my projections and what I'm putting onto them than it has to do with them. And it doesn't mean that there isn't some accuracy to those projections, but the question that I find myself asking a lot of the time is, am I going to get the satisfaction, or am I just busy telling a story about that relationship and letting that story dictate and control my life? And the answer that I've come to is that yes, and that story doesn't serve me in any way, shape, or form usually. So if that's the case, what do I do about it? I could go and talk to them and maybe get some kind of resolution, but again, in my experience, what I found is that more often than not, the other person is more interested in you taking responsibility for everything, including their fuck-ups, and less interested in actually honestly being open and acknowledging where they screwed up and that they played a role in the relationship not working. Particularly the last two relationships that I was in, that was basically the experience that I had. So if I know that that's the case, I also know that I can't really count on someone taking responsibility. And the question that I also have to arrive at is, what would taking responsibility do for me? Would it change anything? I still don't necessarily want to connect with that person, and yet there's still a relationship there. My way around it, or rather through it, was to do a lot of intensive work. I mean, I look back at 2024, the last 4 months in particular, and what do I see? I see myself just kind of being like, whoa. I went through, and I went through a series of 6 different initiatory experiences. And those experiences were really shaped by a desire to heal myself, to do the work I needed to do to resolve my my side of the street when it came to relationship, because what I decided is I don't ever want to be in a relationship again if I'm always going to be a codependent mess, which is what I was. And if I can't advocate for myself and what I need and want, then any person I get involved with is going to disrespect me. And maybe fundamentally what I realized is that I was disrespecting myself. So once I had those realizations, it transformed everything for me. And I started deciding that I had to take ownership, and that ownership for me was more about recognizing where I was giving away my sense of power and agency, and taking that back for myself without necessarily having to apologize or explain myself or do anything else. It was about getting relational with me. And I think that that's really the first step. We have to get relational with ourselves. And often as not, what we've been taught is that, well, in society says, get relational with somebody else. That other person will, Disney movie moment, you'll meet the person, you'll fall in love, and everything will be okay. All the problems will be solved. And they lived happily ever after. Well, the problem with that is that it's selling you a fairy tale, and it's not an accurate one at all. You get into a relationship with somebody, you're bringing with you all the baggage that you have, all the unresolved issues, all the shadows. Robert Bly would say that you were bringing in the case of a man, that he was bringing his witch and putting it into his wife, or girlfriend. And or the giant in the case of the man, taking the giant from the man and putting it, or from themselves, and then putting it into the man if you're a woman. And here's my thoughts on all that. Really, at the end of the day, if I'm going to be relational with anyone else, I've got to learn how to be relational with myself. I've got to be relational with the parts of myself that are that are wounded, that I have been trying to heal in all the wrong ways. And what I notice in general is that people try to heal themselves in all the wrong ways when they think that a relationship with somebody else is going to be the panacea that's going to solve the problem of their lives. It's not going to be the panacea that solves the relationship, or that solves the problems in your life. If anything, a relationship is going to bring all of that out, especially when you're unhealed. And isn't it funny that often as not, we meet people who are at the same level of dysfunction that we're at. They may not fully realize it, or the same level of health. They may not fully acknowledge it or be able to own it. And of course, just because I'm with somebody at the same level doesn't mean that they have the same issues. It just means that they're at a similar level of dysfunction, and they're complimenting me in some form or manner. Oh, excuse me. In my case, it could be, here I was the codependent person, and I was meeting people who were more than happy and willing to take advantage of me, who are busy trying to fill up the emptiness of their lives in some form or manner. And what do I do with that? How do I resolve that? There's no easy answer. There's no cure for that found within another person. So what does it mean to be relational then? Can I be relational with someone else if I am not relational with myself? I have a saying that I think applies here, which is that you can only show up as much for other people as you show up for yourself. And what does that really mean? Well, the more I show up for myself, the better able I am to show up for other people. But if I try to show up for other people, I'm only going to be able to meet them at the capacity that I am already showing up for myself at. And most people aren't going to really be able to fully recognize or be present with that. So it's an interesting aspect, because a lot of times what's happening is we're abandoning ourselves in favor of we think in favor of somebody else, but I would argue that what we're really doing is abandoning ourselves and abandoning that person because we don't know how to be in relationship. If I'm not able to be in relationship with myself, I'm certainly not able to be in relationship with other people because the wounds are going to continue playing out. And that's what I discovered. My wounds were playing out in the relationships that I was in, and their wounds were playing out. And they were playing out in ways where they were activating, and neither side was willing to do the work to really resolve it. And maybe neither side could, because unless if I couldn't show up for myself and I couldn't show up for the other person, what made me think I'd be able to heal myself? I mean, what I discovered is that I had a certain level of awareness that came into play, and that awareness helped me out a lot to start transforming my life. And it didn't change the fact that at the end of the day, I was still nonetheless very much in a place of dysfunction, inwardly and outwardly. So this is one of those cases where we have to look at and recognize how we have abdicated our own power and presence, our own place in the world. One of the most powerful forms of work that we can do involves taking ownership of who we are and what we are through being relational, through recognizing here are my wounds and it's my responsibility to heal them, not someone else's. And how are you going to do that? Well, in my case, what I decided to do this most recent, and really I've been doing this for a little while now. What I decided to do a couple of years ago is I decided to get into men's work because I realized I don't have a good relationship with myself as a man. And if I don't have a good relationship with myself as a man, how am I possibly showing up for anyone else? So I started doing that work, started working on myself and figuring some things out, and that helped. And I got into a relationship way before I was ready. Even though I had done some work on myself, I was still very much at a place where I was not operating in full integrity with myself. So then I got into that relationship, and for a little while it worked. And then as I kept working on myself and growing and transforming who I was, the gap started to widen. And eventually, and it took a lot longer than I would have liked, I realized this relationship wasn't healthy for me, and I left it. I broke up with the person. But just because I broke up with the person doesn't mean that the relationship ended. It just means that it transformed. And that's the thing about relationality. Even if you're not talking with somebody, which in this case I'm not, that doesn't mean the relationship is ended. So how was I going to end it? How was I going to find a way to close things off in a way that felt good for me? It had less to do really with that person than anything else, and that's where doing this intensive inner work mattered. I started working on myself. I started transforming my life. I started showing up differently for me. I chose to go out and have some experiences that stretched me in ways that were really uncomfortable. Going, for example, to an event where there were 398 people who didn't know me. There was one person who did, and that person and I didn't really necessarily care for each other that much. That was hard. It stretched me. I went to this event and I came out of it feeling like a different person because I had stretched myself. I'd put myself into a place where I didn't know anybody there. And there weren't even any processes or things that I knew of that were familiar. And nonetheless, it was something that helped me. It started me on the process, the journey. And here's the interesting thing. Once I started doing that, then I went into, I went in and I had other initiatory experiences. And I kept chipping away at myself, chipping away at the things that weren't working. And forcing a pattern reset where I could not go back to the man I had been, the codependent, needy man. Because by having these experiences where I was continually getting pushed and molded and stress tested in a good way toward becoming the best possible man I could be, it enabled me to change how I showed up and who I was showing up with. And this wasn't easy work to do. It was, in fact, really quite hard. Yet it was effective work because I was no longer holding myself to an experience that wasn't serving me. So I was learning to be relational with myself. And that relationality with myself was helping me see, like, okay, here's the healing I need to do. So I keep chipping away. Boom, 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 boom. Having all these initiatory experiences. And it was funny because I met my beloved. I had met my beloved a bit before this. And we just kind of been getting to know each other. But not like getting involved romantically. But it was around the time toward the end of this that the relationship changed. And what ended up happening is that she asked me, like, why are you doing all of these experiences? Like, you seem to be doing a lot right now. Like, what's going on with that? It was a fair question to ask. I kind of think of it in kind of a way like, well, like, here's this person you're meeting and you like him and everything else. And then you see this person going through a series of radical changes in a short time. Like, what's really going on? Like, of course you're going to ask that question. And I explained that, I was busy doing a personality change, like an identity reset. And that all of this work was essentially helping me transform my identity because I was continually chipping away at who I was. Transforming the nature of my being in order to transform the experiences that I was having. And once I shared some of the things that had happened, she got it. Okay, I get it. I get why you're doing this. What's going on? What all is going on here? And she was fully supportive of it. And I would have done it regardless of whether she approved or not. It wasn't about her approval. It was about me taking care of myself. And as I always say, never do something for the approval of someone else, because here's the truth. You don't really even know if they approve. They have their own projections on you. And even when those projections are gold, like somebody that loves you, they're nonetheless still going to be projections. So I can say, well, hey, I'm choosing to show up this way. Great. I'm glad for you. And that doesn't mean that I necessarily can fully understand or know your experience. Only you can. And you may not even fully know or understand your experience. You may just be going and doing these experiences without fully getting it. There's no right or wrong answer. But what there is presence and awareness. If I want to become the most aware person I can be, I've got to be willing to transform the nature of my presence. And that means that I'm going to challenge myself in a lot of different ways. Ways that I may not be able to fully understand or recognize, and yet ways that are nonetheless powerful and significant. This is a significant part of the work that we do. And I think it's fair to say that this kind of work, this learn in regards to being relational, is necessarily about transforming the relationship with ourselves so that we can show up. So, let's bring this back around to relationships. So, as I said, I've started reading this book. I've actually finished it now, Evolutionary Relationships, and this author talks about mutuality and engagement and leaning in to the engagement. And what I've been thinking about since I read this book is, one, I'm really looking forward to being able to do these practices with my beloved. In person, and discovering like how we can fully lean into each other. And secondly, it strikes me that that what is evolutionary about a relationship is a decision to fully lean into and be present with the experience, no matter where it might go. Albeit with some safeguards. I mean, if somebody's going to suddenly attack me, like with a knife or something like that, well, that is going to definitely change the relationship and not in a positive way. And at that point, I'll kind of be like, well, that may not work out anymore. But I'm assuming in this case, I don't have to worry about that. I'm making a joke, really. But I'm also making a point. An evolutionary relationship, if we're really looking at the idea and the concept of it, is one where there's growth together. What are we really committing to? Well, if I'm in with somebody else, I'm committing to growing with that person. I'm committed to being curious about that person. I'm never assuming I know the answers about that person. Because a lot of times what kills relationships is the assumptions that we make. Like, I know this person. I've got him figured out. Right. In fact, one of the comments that was made to me in the past has been when people have said, well, that I've been romantically connected to, well, the problem is, Taylor, like, I start to get to know you, and then you change again. You become someone different. And I'm like, I'm still me, but yes, there are some changes and transformations happening, because what I'm doing is I am working at the persona level, and I'm working at the identity level as well, but I am changing what isn't working because I'm aware of what isn't working. Some people find this to be really problematic because they want to have a certain status quo, something that feels safe. Here's the problem: nothing is ever safe. Relationships change and transform all the time, and expecting them to stay the same is unrealistic. It doesn't help you. So if we look at relationality, it's how do I relate to other people? Yes, it's how do I relate to myself. It's also how do I show up for the transformations that will inevitably occur. Because they are going to occur. And there's no such thing as relationships not changing and transforming. So that's kind of where we're at here. And this is some stuff for you to mull over and consider. And I hope it's helpful and that you have a great evening. Or great day. I'm recording this in the evening, but really you'll probably be watching this during the day. And if you have questions about this, if you want to explore it further, I do recommend reaching out to me. You can connect with it for a coaching session or many other ways, but I would love to help you and work with you in this space.